Okay, I think we're live. Uh,
Okay.
the lag to the live is real. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie O'Connell, and I'm here with Amanda Monti. Amanda, first introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Amanda Montei. You pronounced my name right, which is amazing because it doesn't always
Because
happen.
I listen to your podcast, which everyone else should do.
Thank you. Yes, I do co-host the podcast Dire Straits with Tracy Clark Flory, which is a feminist podcast. We analyze hetero culture, politics, love, sex, dating. You can find us on Substack, but also wherever you get your podcasts. But I am also the author of two memoirs, most recently, Touched Out, which explores my own sort of experience with motherhood, but also how women's experiences of sex and misogyny and male entitlement affects their motherhood experience. What else? What else? I
And you're
also,
Mad Woman.
yes, I also write the newsletter Mad Woman, which you can find here on Substack. It's feminist takes on politics and culture. So I'm very excited to talk with you about Mad Men.
Mm, yeah. Speaking of the intersection of your work and analysis with culture, it's interesting. I was trying to think when I saw Mad Men pop up on my HBO feed. I want to say it was maybe January.
Yeah, interesting timing, right? Of the
Mm.
re-release.
Mhm. And I feel like I don't know how it came up, but you and I were talking, and I was like, "I'm rewatching Mad Men too." And I feel like
Yeah.
everyone I speak to is kind of going through that same kind of like, "Oh, you are too?" So, you know, what drew you? Why now? Why now to this? Other than it populating on your HBO feed.
Yeah, I mean, it was there and it was staring at me. I watched Mad Men when it first came out, and I'm pretty sure I watched all the seasons. I was at a totally different point in my life. I was like in grad school. I didn't have kids, but well, we'll get into it. I had so many feelings about the show and it made me want certain things. I think I started rewatching it. I mean, honestly, I just needed like a good show that I could sink into that would
Mhm.
take a while to get through, that was not like so timely that I would feel called to write about it. And yet here we are.
Here we are. Oh my gosh. I just want to refresher for anyone who hasn't seen it in a while. The show is set between 1960 and 1970. It follows Don Draper. He's creative director at an advertising agency on Madison Avenue, hence the name Mad Men. And we follow his colleagues and him through their professional and their personal lives. I like it because you get a chance to see a lot of the history and the social change of this time portrayed, but you're getting it through the lens of people's like day-to-day minutia of their lives. And I think
Yeah.
that's what drew me to watching Mad Men in this moment, because I feel like the world around me is chaos and the world in Mad Men is chaos. You have the Vietnam War raging in the
Yeah. Yeah.
background. This is not a TV show that centers that. It centers on the people who are getting up and going to work every day, and like this major travesty is happening at the same time. And that's a lot how I feel. And I think that's
Yeah.
why for me, it really resonates in this moment, even if that may be problematic, which we will talk about.
Yes. So many layers. Yeah. I mean, that's super interesting to think about it as being similar to this time. All the characters in Mad Men are like it's like sort of like a Forrest Gump
Mm.
tale, right? Like there's all this history and politics happening around them while they have a lot of sex.
With
It's
a
funny
lot
because
of
as I was
people.
watching it, I was like, oh, like other generations also lived through like crazy times,
Mhm.
and they also felt like the world was ending. I do think we're living in a distinctly unprecedented time, but it's interesting that you brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly didn't have that added element of having, the stream on their phones, attached to
Right.
them every moment of every day, reminding them of the
Right.
atrocities around the world.
Right.
And I think maybe that speaks to how in addition to the dimensions of class and race and power, how those characters could be so insulated from the world around them too. Um,
Totally. So interesting because the TV at the Draper home becomes like kind of a really important portal into the
mhm.
outside world.
Yeah.
And it's also like, I know we'll get into Betty Draper, but it's like her babysitter at times. She's like, she tells the kids, like, go watch TV when they're,
Mhm.
bothering her. But yeah, no phones, just like, so, there's a couple of those scenes where they put the radio on, or I think like when Kennedy's shot, they're all watching the TV. But
Yeah.
yeah, otherwise they're kind of insulated from like the real stakes of the politics that's happening around them, mostly because they're all white.
Yeah. But I think the other reason that this show always seems to find an eager audience that's a little bit darker is that it really speaks to nostalgia.
Yeah.
And I think we can make the case, or I at least will argue the case that can be really dangerous because
Mhm,
you're
mhm.
talking about something that's being portrayed on screen, like, if you described what was actually happening as pretty ugly, pretty consistently all around. If
For
you just
sure.
describe the action, what do we see in this show? We see harassment, assault, um, based on gender identity, racial identity, sexuality,
Yep.
uh anti fat bias. We see, I
Yeah.
mean, just like literally everything. We see rape, we see the worst of the worst, and we see it constantly. Like every single episode
Oh, yeah.
is just descriptively horrible, horrible behavior upon horrible, horrible behavior. And
Yeah.
yet we're experiencing it through something that looks beautiful.
Looks so beautiful
Yeah.
and so attractive, and yeah, every episode as I've been rewatching it, I've been like, "Oh my gosh, that is so dark." Like, it's all so dark, and it's so well told, like,
Mhm.
yes, it's beautiful, and I know we wanna talk about, like, the aesthetics of the housewife and all that, the hair, the makeup, the outfits, the mid-century furnishings and sets, like, so beautiful and alluring,
Yeah.
but the traumatic moments, the power play, like, it is all so powerfully told.
Mhm.
So it just hooks you, you
Yeah.
know? Ugh.
It really does, and that's why I was wondering, like, what is it about this that makes me wanna watch it so much? Because I was thinking about, again, speaking to, like, nostalgia and
Yeah,
the through line of what pulls you in. When I was describing to myself what I felt watching this, I it sounded a lot like what people say to me about watching trad wife content.
yeah,
That they are just pulled into it. It just feels so good to watch, and I thought, "Eek," you know? Why am I
yes.
having this same response? Why am I using the same description,
Yeah.
in my own rewatching of Mad Men? And I don't know if you were experiencing that all.
Well, it is really interesting because, yeah, I don't know that I have, like, the relationship with the show. I don't know. I mean, I guess there is a bit of, like, projection and nostalgia for, like, yeah, just being like a beautiful housewife or really like the secretaries, the single women, like I find them really interesting. I mean, I think for me the pull to the show, and then of course I do have moments that I'll talk about like where I just like want to be like degraded by Don Draper, but like I think like my pull into the show is the characters. Like they're just very well constructed characters. Whether I wanna, like, be them or not, right? We can
Yes.
talk about that. But I mean, that's isn't that so similar to trad wife content, right? Is that
Mhm.
it is just, like, it's an escape, it's not real, that there would probably be some issues with living like that, but it's compelling, and so you can't look away.
I mean, I think on that note, we should talk about Don Draper
Yes, yes, let's do it.
because I'm
Bonnie.
I'm almost done with my rewatch for context. I'm on, like, my last 2 episodes, and I
Mhm.
remember how it ends. But even now, I am just looking at the screen like, "Oh my gosh, that man is so handsome." And he is horrible. He is a
Yes.
bad boss. He is a bad husband. He's a
Yes.
bad father, which we can talk about in more nuance in a bit. I mean,
Yes.
he's just like a bad person. And it makes me think of, like, how much not just how good looking he is, but the way he's perfectly dressed, well groomed all
His
the
hair.
time. Oh my gosh, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how and it makes me think more broadly of, like, is that also the conditioning of heterosexuality, of being
For sure.
able to excuse no matter how bad the behavior is,
Yeah.
uh, a man's bad behavior if, he complies with that kinda standard of I'm not saying, like, the beauty standard masculinity, but there is something to
Yeah.
that.
Well, I think there's, like, a lot of really interesting things that the show does to make him, likable as a character outside of just making him so hot, which, of course, is well done. And they're also, like, in the early seasons, there's a lot of commenting on, like, "Oh, he's just such a beautiful man," like, so they're really, like, playing into that. But I think there's also, to the fatherhood point, there's a lot of highlighting how good of a dad he is.
Mhm.
He's fun dad, right? Which is like a trope that we still very much have now. And, in terms of thinking about like how this plays off of like sort of normative tropes in terms of heterosexuality, that's a very alive and well, right? Like, okay, he works too much. He constantly cheats on his wife. Like, how does this man have so much sex, right? But when he gets home, he's so attentive with the kids. And he's actually a much better parent than Betty because he doesn't have to be around all the time.
Right, when he's present being the caveat, and I think that speaks
Yes,
so
exactly.
much to exactly what we're experiencing today. A lot of the
Yeah.
times what I certainly see in the data in the interviews I do, it's like, man, if you're only showing up and having to do the labor of childcare and not the housework, and the
Yeah.
care you do is not like the care of like diapers and life and scheduling, but play. I
Yeah.
mean, how much that's an easy way to be the fun one or the good one or the
Totally.
well-regulated one,
Right.
and it's just such, yeah, I was thinking about a lot how the show keeps you rooting for him,
For
even
sure.
as he engages in the same cycle every single season. There is always
Yeah.
that pull and that hope and the belief that maybe this time it will be different up until the very end.
Right.
Maybe this time it will be different.
Yeah.
And man, the show does not give you the same grace for anyone else, at least none of the
Yeah.
women, certainly none
Yeah.
of the women. And I think, like, some of that I think is the show, but I think it's also the broader culture of what we're indoctrinated into accepting.
For sure. Well, and his relationships with the women other than Betty, right? His
Mhm.
wife, Betty, are also there to to serve him, to serve his character development, right?
Yeah.
With Joan, he develops this very like sort of special vaguely non-sexual relationship, supportive relationship. I know we wanna talk about Joan, but there's, like, a crazy, moment where her sexuality is being sold for the company, and he's the one that tells
Mhm.
her not to do it,
Mhm.
right? And then with Peggy, I just finished, this episode where Peggy leaves,
Mm.
the company, and he holds her hand, and he kisses it, and I wanted to talk to you about these moments because as a character, he sort of supports women's ambition in the
Mhm.
workplace,
Mhm.
provided
Yep.
that those women are not his wives. Because the wives, he explodes on them whenever they have these brief moments of like wanting to be artists or, Betty wants to be what a model.
A model, yes. Mhm.
And I was thinking about you and I know you've thought a lot about that interpersonal dynamic in heterosexual relationships where women, become ambitious and their male partners become abusive.
Yeah, and they lash out at them, and it's the same in when Don remarries to Megan.
Yeah.
the only season we see him be faithful is when he first marries Megan, and he
For
doesn't
a
even
little
make it
while.
through the whole season. Yeah.
Right,
As
exactly.
so, for a recap, Megan is working at the company with Dawn. She's a secretary, then becomes a copywriter. She says,
Mhm.
This wasn't really my dream. My dream was to be an actress."
Right.
Okay, he's kind of a little pouty. He does this kind of withdrawal that we see a lot of men do, statistically, of course, when women assert their own ambition. But it isn't until she actually succeeds in her ambition that
Mhm.
he steps out on her. And
Right,
that was such a textbook moment of like what I see in the data coming to life on screen. It's just remarkable. It's like,
yeah,
not only are you not allowed to have your own dream, but how dare you succeed at it, right?
right, right, of course. And
And so then I think that's telling is like, oh, your ambition is only acceptable in so much as it serves me, or I love women.
totally.
If you watch the Manosphere doc, the Louis Theroux thing, they all say this. They're like, "Well, I can't hate women. I love women." But what they're talking about is the way in which women's labor, sexual labor, like emotional labor supports them. And so then like that love is always conditional on their compliance with serving, and not I love women for who they are and what they do for themselves, and I'm there to support their dreams. And I think sometimes we see Don, step in, as you to your point, to play that supportive role to people he's not
Right.
married to. But even then, he has moments where he gets a little touchy with Peggy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I
Mhm.
mean, poor Peggy, like all she has to go through. I think what's interesting is like what makes the show still feel feminist or comfortable to watch as a feminist is that the female characters are also pretty well
Yeah.
developed, and we should talk about them specifically. But there are moments where like Megan Draper's second wife sort of speaks back to him, right? And says kind of
Mhm.
what we're all thinking, right? And Betty too, she has like her moments. She has the famous scene shooting the gun in the air with the cigarette dangling from her mouth. But Megan, I remember in a recent episode I watched, there's a moment where she wants to go travel to be an actress. And she's like, this is how it works. Like, you said you wanted to support me, but now that I have to leave the house and inconvenience you, now you're not into it. Right. So there are those moments where the female characters get to speak and sort of have their feminist voice, but the whole
Mhm.
show always comes back around to Dawn, of course.
Yes. Um, I do want to talk a little bit more about the women. You did mention the Joan. You alluded to the
Yeah.
Joan, and I'm just saying the Joan. Like
The
everyone knows what I'm
Joan.
talking
Poor
about.
Joan. I mean,
Poor
Joan.
Joan. I mean,
She
poor
goes
all
through a
of them.
lot.
She really
Poor
does.
all of them, yes.
But one of the most fascinating things to me with Joan is a and again, this is kind of more universally for all of them, but for Joan, it's her sexuality that becomes
Yeah,
this kind of like defining characteristic. It's the way she's valued by other people. But if she ever uses that to get something for herself, then all
right.
of a sudden, oh, she's going to be put down. She's going to be excluded. How dare she? But then she's being excluded anyway because she's in this misogynistic world. And
Yeah.
so it's just like a very good example of the no way to win situation. And I would say what sexuality is to Joan, it's like Peggy's constant determination
Mhm.
is weaponized against her. And
Yeah, yeah.
I also think the all the characters on the show kind of have a really good, they kind of showcase how no matter which way you play the game, you could lead with your sexuality, you lead with your ambition, you lead with, y following the right script, marriage, kids, house, like, there
Right.
is no way to win. So the idea that you
Totally.
can choose differently or crack the code by making the right choices and practicing the right behaviors is just a farce, and I do appreciate that about the show.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Joan is such an interesting character. To me, I think what really stood out in my rewatch was her rape by her husband before they marry.
Yeah.
It's such a powerful moment of her kind of knowing that she's been violated by this man and shoving it down because her dream, to your point, right, of like, no matter which way you play the game as a woman in this society, you're screwed, right? Her dream was always to be married,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And of course, she starts as a mistress. She can't marry, the man she's sleeping with. Um, and then she gets married and the marriage falls apart because he's cruel. But yeah, Joan and Peggy, their relationship too is quite
Mhm.
interesting. It is, I think, kind of like you're alluding to, is like it's this sort of tension around women's ambition and like what you're supposed to do with it in the workplace and how much should you be like a man and how much should
Mm.
you use your sexuality. And they have a couple moments where they really like address it between the two of them. And Joan is like, "Oh, okay, you're gonna, go about it this way. That's the wrong way because this is sort of what the backlash is gonna be." So their relationship I find really interesting. And then of course Peggy, like, I completely forgot this. She gives birth to a child in the beginning of the series and like disappears and gives it away.
I
It's
know.
like insanity.
Yeah, and then she's working with those people, the man who
Right.
impregnated her for the rest of the series, but you kind of forget
Exactly.
that because she's so competent and she's so just proceeds, don't be too emotional, right? And
Right.
she's not, and
Right.
still, she's constantly facing
Right.
sexism, being put down, being told she can't be on an account because she's a woman, and one
Right.
of the
Right.
things
Right.
that strikes me about the Peggy story, particularly, like, after she's become a copywriter at this point, after the whole, giving birth situation, uh, I can't there's nothing that happens to Peggy that I cannot see or don't see happening to women today in the workplace,
I mean,
and
exactly. Yeah.
I think there is a little bit speaking more to the idea of the nostalgia of it all, there
Mhm.
is a little bit of a delusion that people buy into when they watch these series,
Just a
uh,
little.
just a little of how far we've come.
Yeah.
And this was a debate that played out as the show was airing. I have to bring up a data point because I love data. There was a woman
Yes.
who did, her thesis called The Mad Men Effect: Sexism-Based Media Content and the
Mhm.
Rise of Retrosexism. And she found that when men were exposed to 1960s based content like Mad Men, they expressed more sexist attitudes toward women's, particularly hostile sexist attitudes,
Huh.
and they had less progressive views around gender roles because not because they thought, "Oh, well, that was better." What they mistakenly thought was it's so much better now, so equality has already been achieved, so we
Yes,
don't
yes,
need
yes.
to worry about feminism so much, and my gosh, like, the parallel between that attitude and what I see come up in the data now in terms of, like, people's perceptions of how far we've
Mhm.
come and how this kind of like resentment against women is really driven so much by these misperceptions that like why do we need equity initiatives? Why do we need to keep talking about women? Because like we're past all this. But
Right.
I think that's like the opposite thing we should be taking away from this stuff is we are not past this. There's certainly things that are less explicit, but I don't know that they're that much less present.
No, and they've just morphed into, other iterations of, like,
Mm.
what we're seeing. I mean, yeah, I wanted to, because earlier I was saying Peggy's story is, like, so insane, it's so wild, but it's so realistic.
Yeah.
And, her being sent away to this home, right, where she has to give I mean, this is my co-host, on the podcast, Tracy Clark Flory. Her book is about her mom being sent away to a home for
Mhm.
unwed mothers in the '60s, and the '60s was not that long ago,
Mhm.
and now, of course, we just have other iterations of this, in this culture of forced motherhood. But I think the point about, like, feeling like we've come so far is a really interesting one because there's an element of that within the narrative of the show as well, right?
Mhm.
Among the women, right? Like, well, we have this like equality in the workplace, right?
Yeah.
It's not as good as it should be.
Right? I mean, speaking of, there's no, uh, people of color in that office until the 5th I think it's the 5th season.
Is that
Uh,
Dawn?
it's Dawn.
Yeah,
Dawn who bec Dawn, who becomes Donald Draper's
right,
secretary in season 5, and only after they they were kind of forced the company was forced into hiring her because they were making a joke about some other company being
right,
racist in the paper with an ad for
right.
people of color to be employed. So it's
Yeah.
just
Oh,
yeah,
and there
growth
are
of the
some,
show.
horrific moments of racism in the show, like
Mhm. There's
and
blackface.
those there's a blackface scene, and in the beginning of the episode now, there's a sort of disclaimer and a warning about it, that's like, "Well, we've decided to sort of keep this in the show because it reflects the history of the time." And it is complicated because it's like it is a kind of historical archiving of what would have
Right,
happened
right.
then, but again, to your point about sentimentality and
Mhm.
nostalgia, there's such a glamorization and sexualization of the whiteness of the time, the
Yes.
thinness, all of the stuff that we discussed that's so alluring. And so it just, oh yeah, it didn't age well for me that they actually went there. And then there's moments of just scathing racism in the offices,
Mhm.
which again are so reflective of the time. But so much of the I mean, I guess all the politics and culture happens like outside the office, as we were talking about,
Mhm.
but a lot of the sort of upheaval around race of the time happens off screen.
Yes.
Like there's who is it? The character who goes down to Mississippi to help register voters with
Yes,
his
Kinsey.
girlfriend,
Kinsey, yeah.
Kinsey, yeah.
Mhm.
And then later doesn't he like get in with the Hare Krishnas? Like so
Yes.
he's like the only politically engaged character and he's kind of like a joke, right?
Right, right, and then there's also Peggy's boyfriend, the journalist, um,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
eh, who's just in terms of being, like, politically engaged,
Mhm.
but I think his character is there to set up as a contrast to the world in which, Peggy and everyone else in the show is living, in which, like, how could it's almost like the detachment some people I encounter in my life now feel is like as much as I
Yeah,
am insulated from current events, I have very strong feelings about them. And I am mystified when people don't or they say they're not political in some way. And I think the show does that very well in terms
yeah.
of like showing how that showed up for people then too.
Totally. I mean, it's so interesting because the world of the show is so much like about power dynamics within white
Yeah.
heterosexuality and white workplaces, right? So those are like the primary conflicts that everyone is constantly facing. It's like how does gender show up at home and how does it show up in the workplace? But the question of the sort of white supremacist and racial politics of the time is largely secondary, if not like,
Mhm.
even further down the
Yeah.
list of the show's priorities. Should we
Yes.
should we talk about Betty?
Oh, we should do a deeper dive on Betty. I do
Yeah,
I just I when I
poor
wrote
Betty.
that we should talk about Mad Men, one of the first characters I thought about was Betty Draper because I am always struck by the way Betty Draper became a kind of style icon.
Oh, totally.
And
Totally. January Jones, right?
January Jo I mean, she's gorgeous, she
She's
also
white and
she's
blonde.
white, right? Like, she's not just gorgeous, but she's, like, gorgeous in the most, white patriarchal than
Right.
no, the standards of the culture. So, I think what was interesting to me was how much again, coming back to, like, how this is playing out now, in a lot of the retro trad wife content I see
Mhm.
online,
Yeah.
people are emulating a Betty Draper style and
Yes.
as aspirational. And it's not just the style that they're preaching, it's the lifestyle they're preaching that this is ease, this is freedom, this is joy and independence. But if you ever watch these people must not have watched Mad Men. To be fair, like most of the people who create this content are 20 years old, so they probably haven't watched Mad Men.
Right, right.
But
Maybe, or maybe
or
who
maybe
knows? Yeah.
not. But if you've watched Mad Men, Betty Draper is a tragic character from start to finish. My
So
recollection was
dark.
like, oh, I knew she had a tragic ending, but no, like she opens with panic attacks and
Yeah.
feelings of emptiness and horrible experiences with her husband and everyone around her.
Totally. I was just searching while you were talking who the trad wife is that looks so Betty Draper, S.T.
S.D.
Williams.
Williams.
And
Yeah.
you're right, she's 24. But such a Betty Draper type character, right? And
Mhm.
her whole thing, if I'm remembering correctly, right, is like putting on the full face of makeup and the full outfit, like, before your husband even wakes up. Betty is doing that from like the first scene.
Yep.
But yeah, she's so depressed. She's anxious. She's obviously, like, famously drinking and smoking constantly, even when she's pregnant.
Yes. Oh my
And
god.
right away, she suspects that Dawn is cheating on her. And
Mhm.
something I found really interesting is like the way that the show handles her sort of relationship with marital sexuality.
Mm.
Because of course he's free to cheat, he's constantly cheating, but it's all not spoken about in the beginning between them.
Mhm.
In the very, very, I guess, what is that, like the first
It's at least
season?
1 season. It might be 2 seasons because there are also several moments early on where she tries to confront him about things and he completely gaslights her about it.
Oh, totally gaslights her,
Yeah.
like, absurdly, and yeah. But there's also a really interesting moment where she says, like, she's so lonely and bored all day, and all she does is wait around for him to come home so they can be like this, and they're in bed, about to have sex. So I found that really fascinating. I mean, again, that feeds into the Don Draper likability, right? And
Yes.
it's like he's such a handsome man. That happens a lot in the early seasons, right? She's so lucky to have this hot husband who she just craves all the time, but of course he's always absent. And so increasingly she loses it. She's a mad woman. She goes crazy and she goes to a psychiatrist.
Absolutely, and she needs it. I was thinking more about
She does.
she needs it. Like, Betty Draper is a flawed person, but one of the things I was thinking about is, the show sets you up to understand why Dawn is a flawed person. They do this huge deep dive into his childhood trauma. One of the things that I thought
Yeah.
about was just how much everyone in Don's life is, like, really championing him every day and supporting him and giving him grace,
Yeah.
even without knowing all of his childhood trauma. And he gets away with so, so, so much, and he still gets to be likable. And then I was thinking, oh, Betty has some pretty bad behavior. She hits her kids.
Yeah.
She fires her maid without cause.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
she's terrible. She's horrible, horrible. But I was thinking about, okay, why am I, like, feeling sympathetic toward Betty, and I'm feeling like Dawn, it has too much of my sympathy. Well,
Mhm.
I thought, well, it's not just that, like, Betty had this trauma and she just leans on that as an excuse for all her bad behavior.
Right.
It's that she's being traumatized every single day by these people. Like, it never
Right.
shifts. Like, John has this, trauma, and then, like, everyone is constantly building him up after that. And then
Right. Totally.
Betty is being re-traumatized, like, on a daily basis and being gaslit on top of it and being made to feel valueless on top of it. And I'm not
Right.
saying, like, okay, and therefore it's okay that she has bad behavior. I don't think that's true.
Right.
But
Right.
it
Right.
is interesting how she is so much less likable to people given
Right.
that dichotomy.
Yeah, well, she just doesn't get that robust backstory
Yeah.
to excuse her behavior. And, narratively, we rely so much on that, like, trauma plot, right, which has been written about, for us to, like, understand a character's bad behavior. I mean, we get a little bit about her mom and her dad, who she, like, weirdly loves, even though he's not that great. And then he's, like, aging and I think has Alzheimer's, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
But
He passes away.
there Also, I feel like there aren't that many counterbalancing bits of her character.
Mm,
We talked about how Don, he's got these complex relationships with the women in the workplace, right? Which sort of
yeah.
make him more likable. He's got so many relationships with women, and that when he's cheating on Betty, he even has these kind of tender, interesting relationships with his mistresses.
Mhm.
But yeah, you're right. Like Betty's just constantly being gaslit, treated poorly, and acting out. And she doesn't really get any relationships that make her appealing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
her second husband, it's kind of nice there for a while and then it gets real dark again.
Mhm. Yeah, he's running for office, and they're at a fundraiser, and as soon as she says anything about her own political views, he
Right.
loses it. He, like, screams at
He's like,
her,
"Why are you
and
talking?"
it's just like it's again that, like, the building up of hope that it'll be different,
Right.
but it's not.
You know what's really interesting about Betty too is that such a big part of her character is her treatment of her daughter.
Yes.
Um And the little boy, right, because Betty and Dawn have 2 kids,
Yeah.
a daughter and a
And then
son.
a third at some point.
Oh, I didn't get there yet, so I forgot about the 3rd kid. But the son is almost a non-existent character, and
Yeah.
that's a fascinating choice, right? Because the show could have done something where he's sort of passing on patriarchal violence. There's a couple moments, like, I remember there's one scene where the son sees Dawn behave badly, but then Dawn, like, sits down with him and is like, "Things are gonna be different for you," kinda like
Mhm.
and his son says, like, "You need a new daddy," or there's just a really sweet moment. Um, but the daughter, what is her name?
Sally.
Sally, of course. Sally is just indoctrinated by Betty in fat phobia. Betty's cruel to her. There's, like, a few moments, like, when she gets her period where they're, like, kinda getting along, but for the most part, it's a pretty sad relationship.
It's very sad relationship,
And
and
abusive, I should say.
yeah, and it is always interesting to me to think about what becomes of Sally, because in a way, I think we see her push back against a lot of what her mom
Right,
indoctrinated her into, but
right,
it's
right.
also like, that stuff is in there. It's hardwired,
Poor
We s
Sally.
yeah, so and then, like, when she tries to find refuge in Dawn, she's
Yeah.
so often disappointed there too. There is a scene, you're probably not there on your rewatch, where Sally walks in on Dawn cheating with
Mm,
another woman, and I think it's, one of the only moments in the show I was trying to think about when I think Dawn cries. There's not very many moments where
mhm.
you
No,
see
no.
Dawn, like, stressed and discombobulated and sad, but, like, you really see
Drunk.
her cry in that moment, and
Mhm.
I just thought that was really interesting, because then I was thinking, okay, Sally is now holding all of that and all of her mother in her at the same time,
Yeah.
and both absorbing it and rebelling up against both of those things. And where does that leave you, I guess? Where does that leave you in 10 years when you're on your own relationship arc? We get to see her go off to boarding school and start to
Mhm.
act out a little bit, but I wondered a lot because coming back to what I see in the research is intergenerational transmission of attitudes is a real thing,
Oh, yeah.
and, the way power dynamics play out in the home informs our expectations of how we expect, the power dynamics to play out on our own lives, and that certainly falls along, gendered lines in most households because of, heterosexuality. So,
Yeah.
what are you
Yeah.
absorbing about what who is allowed to do what, and what transgressions are forgivable and
Right,
not, and yeah,
right.
it is interesting to your point that they center really Sally in that and not the boys.
Right, right. And actually that's interesting that the way that Dawn damages her is by sleeping with other women and not in the ways that I think most fathers damage their
Mm,
daughters, which is by, mistreating women, right? Like, it's not a moment of outright misogyny that makes him cry.
mm,
It's just the broken home, right? It's the
mhm,
fact that he slept around. Which actually makes me think, there's some really interesting things in the show around divorce and the sort of broken home
mm,
mentality. They're constantly repeating that.
mhm,
Early in the series, there's an interesting single divorced woman who's kind of a foil for Betty,
mm,
but then also sort of opens the door for Betty to start thinking about divorce.
mhm.
Um, so it's really, really interesting. I mean, and obviously, like, the male characters are just constantly like marrying a secretary, getting divorced, marrying a younger model,
Mhm.
But the women's relationship with divorce and the way in which it causes like this social stigma, I
Mhm.
found really interesting.
I'm now that you say that, I'm trying to remember if Joan actually does get divorced from her husband, because I know they're not together anymore.
Yeah, I think she does
Okay.
because, well, where I am in the rewatch, which is like end of season 5, she's just starting to go through that,
Yeah.
and she's talking about how he served her with divorce papers,
That's right.
and she's like, "What the fuck? Like, I don't wanna be married to him. Like, how did he get the sorta last laugh here?" Yeah, yeah, and of course, it's for her, it's like this moment of failure, right? Because all
Yeah.
she wanted was to be a wife, to be a good wife and mom, and now she's got a broken home, and that is what leads her to sell her sexuality for the company and get a stake in the company. It's
Yes.
very interesting
Right.
negotiation.
That Joan is able to get a partnership at the company is made possible by the fact that she agrees to the conditions of acquiring a client, which is to sleep with, one of the decision makers on
Right.
that client's team.
Yeah.
And, that is such a tough moment.
Yeah, it made me feel it was very like a Weinstein-esque
Yeah.
because the client is sort of demanding that he get Joan if they want his business.
Mhm.
But she makes the trade of her own, well, you know, who we can break apart whether it's really a choice, right? But she does it because she is about to get divorced and she needs financial
And
security.
she's a single mother. She's
Exactly.
about to become a single mother, yes, and,
Exactly.
um, I if you when we see the series play out, her ownership stakes eventually makes her a millionaire, so, in the 1960s. So, as a woman, as a
Yay,
single
Joan.
mother with
Good.
a child, and it's like, okay, you can argue that that maybe shouldn't be how you have to get it, but if that's the only way to get it, I think to the point about choice, like, this is something that comes up for me again still now all the time, this
Yeah.
idea, like, "Well, just choose differently." Well, that's not the right way to choose or make it
Right, right, right.
it's just, or even the concept of agency in general, like, I was on the Reddit forums as I was thinking more about my rewatch, and people were like, "Why does Megan act like she has no agency?" And I'm like,
Mhm.
what agency are you talking about? You ascribe so much to
Right.
women's, power and choice, and I think this happens still today, where we're talking about these things like that they have the same choices accessible to them. They don't. They don't
Right,
have the same choices to make. They have completely different constraints. They can make the same choice and have a completely different outcome. They don't have the same support to make the same choices, right? It's
right,
just
right.
that part struck me as, like, that is so still true. So still true now.
Totally, and I mean, so much of it is because the women are afraid to be divorced or
Mhm.
single, and there's the social stigma of that, which is centered, in the show, but it is also just the financial reality of it.
Mhm.
Not everyone has that opportunity like Joan, and she goes through a lot of ups and downs in terms of
She does,
career, right?
she does.
Because she's trying to play the game. She's trying to use her agency to buy herself a position of power in this male dominated system by getting married, by being a mother, by giving up her career. Then that doesn't work. Well, okay, what can I do at work?
Mhm.
So I feel like all the female characters have quite a bit of agency and they're constantly bumping up against the limits of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, as you were just saying that, I was like, "Oh, wow," Joan in and of herself does take every tack, like, she outperforms, she takes initiative in the workplace, she's constantly going up above and beyond,
Yeah.
anyone else, including her male peers, and it still does not get her the result. The thing that gets her the result is when she's making this trade-off with her sexuality, and so it's like,
Yeah.
man, that's that is the only choice, I guess, that was really, effective.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and I really struggle so much with, again, the reframing of this as something that is all in the past. And,
Right. Right.
or to the coming back to the trad wife of it all, a past we should emulate or lionize or romanticize.
I mean, I think that's the fascinating sort of like paradox of this particular show is that it is this glamorization and fetishization of this time when, white supremacy, male supremacy, reigned. Not that it doesn't, today, right? It's so alluring, it's so appealing, right? And yet a lot of what the show does is remind us that it wasn't great. But it does seem like, and I wonder what you think about this, like the legacy of the show has been more the aesthetics. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the aesthetics of the show. It seems like, I mean, certainly within trad culture, that's exactly what we get is a fetishization of, this old-timey heterosexuality without any of the complications,
Mhm.
being acknowledged. How much of that, of course, is like from Mad Men, and
Right.
how much of it is just sort of the swirl of culture and politics that we're in, you know?
I mean, I remember when so for context, the show I aired between I think it was 2007 and 2015, and that's interesting because
It
that's
is
basically the
interesting.
whole Obama presidency, and that it wraps right before the Trump presidency, I find really fascinating.
Huh.
A and I can't remember if I was watching it in real time or I may have watched it, like, in the 2010s as it was entering its final season, but my recollection was there was a big, there's that one designer who makes those kinds of dresses, uh,
Mm,
like the Jones style dresses, and that
mhm.
that designer was blowing up then. There was kinda like a lot of the fashion symbols had gotten a new kind of cultural currency,
Right.
but I think that was like a very, fashion oriented, takeaway from the show airing. What I
And
see
home decor, right?
and home decor, oh my
Like the
gosh, yes.
mid-century
And so
modern.
modern, yep,
Yeah.
totally. But the way I see it now is more of like, oh, it's this whole bigger push toward romanticizing that whole era. It's not just about a fashion or piece of furniture. It's like, oh, the submission to men is part of what is being
Yes.
glamorized in a way that I don't remember being true in when I first watched it. Now that may have been happening, but I don't recall that. So I do think it's interesting, like that this we're going through this rewatch in this cultural moment when this whole time period is being elevated as the good old days, and it's
Yeah.
like, the good old days for whom? Right?
Right. Right. Well, for white guys, I mean, yeah, this is what I always say about trad culture, which is that like it's a kink, right? It's a sexual
Mhm.
kink, related to domination and submission, which fine, right? But
Yeah.
it is a kink transformed into an entire political orientation,
Yeah.
that is, of course, also mixed with Christian nationalism, right? And all these other sort of worldviews, getting swirled together. Um, the manosphere, right? Obviously, the far right is a very like ideologically complex and contradictory world, right?
Mhm.
But in terms of like the trad heterosexual dynamic that is so fetishized in in this culture, it's so much about that. It's just about being degraded by men, being
Mhm.
controlled by them, submitting to them, and just removing all of the violence and danger from it. Yeah.
Yes, and then the myth now that, that's the key to unlocking, our not just our happiness, but our economic prosperity, which is funny
Yeah.
when you think about this show is like the advertising agency is in constant economic turmoil, like every
Right.
season.
Right. Well, and then it's all the answer to solving the problem of the sexual division of labor,
Oh,
right?
yeah, mhm.
Like, it's this is the way that we solve what we see in the show, which is that women can't make it in the workplace and they also can't make it at home. Not actually thinking about patriarchy and gender hierarchy, right? But just going back home, just
Yeah.
staying out of the workplace, that'll solve it. That's the kinda line of thinking that I just find ridiculous.
Well, I think one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of why that maybe feels comforting is when something is so aesthetically driven, it
Right.
becomes a thing that you can buy,
Yeah.
or if you perceive it as something you can buy, it's like, okay, if I buy the mid-century modern furniture and the dress and everything else, it's very consumable.
Yes.
Whereas,
Right.
liberation, what's the aesthetic? You know? What do you what does
Totally.
it look like, to
Dirty hippies and
yeah, and that's how it's portrayed. It's portrayed as this,
yes.
like, bad thing or, unclean or
Yes.
crazy, purple hair, whatever. And it's just like,
I'll
when
take
I
it.
think about where we go in the future, I do think about it. If I was to make a TV show and
Mhm.
it was really to lean into an aesthetic of liberation, I don't know how and to be made appealing to people. I don't even
Right,
know what it
right.
would I don't know what the propaganda would be because I just
Ex
don't think propaganda is I mean, I think propaganda is aesthetic by design.
exactly, right, and that's the problem, right, is that
Yeah.
the left is sort of,
Mm.
you know, inherently opposed to propaganda and to aestheticizing sort of like one vision of what a life would
Yeah.
look like, right?
Yeah.
And so that creates a complication when you're up against an entire propaganda machine. And people on the right, male influencers on the right, I've written about this a little bit, openly talk about aestheticizing their politics as a way to lure people in. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's they know what they're doing.
I mean, yeah, and we'll wrap up because we could keep going down this rabbit hole, but just to
For
say
sure.
in this Manosphere documentary, like, these guys are talking about looks maxing, they're doing crazy things to their body to
Exactly.
conform to the aesthetic, so it has been interesting to see, how that is now evolving more into men's spaces, but not in a good way.
Sure. Or like, the Mar-a-Lago face, like,
Yes.
yeah, the aesthetics of the right they're going hard.
They're aggressive and painful and costly, and that's by design,
Right.
but, I think maybe that's good because at least, like, it's obvious, it's more explicit, the effort is part of it. In with Mad Men, I think a lot of it is made to look more effortless, even though it is effortful,
Yeah,
um, and that I think, can reinforce the delusion a little more, so I guess I'd rather take the wild propaganda that's obvious than the one that's, pretending to be easy that isn't.
totally. I mean, it's interesting because the more I watch the show, like, yeah, you do feel yourself sort of settle into that aesthetic and have a kind of yearning for just this like hot New York City lifestyle. But really, I think what brings me back to the show is thinking about like the world that my mother would have grown up in, the
Yes.
power dynamics she would have seen, like how my grandmother suffered as a stay at home housewife, how she too would have been, pilled up, well, was pilled up and and what, men thought that they were entitled to.
Mhm.
So, so much I think about the show, and I know we have to wrap up. We didn't even talk about the, allegations against the show's
Yeah.
creator. But so much about the show is also like, this feels like a bit of a throwaway, but like what you bring to it, and
Mm.
and sort of what you're seeking in it.
I don't think that's a throwaway because I was thinking I this is maybe my 3rd or 4th rewatch of Mad Men. I love rewatching shows, and it's funny, I think I love rewatching them because I forget so much. But the
Totally.
thing that strikes me about it is it tells me how much I've changed when I
Mhm.
rewatch a show. And
Yeah.
one of the things I realized this time around was my tolerance for Don is not very high anymore. As
No,
good
he's
looking
not
as
that
he
hot
is,
anymore.
but from day one, like, I think in the beginning, I the first few times I watched it, certainly the first time I watched it, I I
Yeah,
I rooted for him, and
yeah.
I'm, like, not ashamed, but I'm kind of embarrassed, like, "What? You're
I know,
rooting for this guy from
I know.
episode 1, he's being an asshole, and you're rooting for him?"
Yeah.
But I think he's horrible, and that's pretty clear to me now in a way that wasn't before. So I think rewatches, maybe more than anything, tells you how you've changed, and I think that's always interesting.
That's fascinating because I really did not find him as hot this time as I
Mhm.
definitely did in my 20s. I wanted to go, like, drink whiskey and, like, have my own Don Draper, and this time I was like, "Betty is fascinating."
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. I
Mhm.
think that's a wonderful place to land. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank
Where
you.
can we find you again? I know you said it at the beginning, but say it again.
Yes, you can find my newsletter on Substack, Mad Woman. It's amandamonte.substack.com, or you can just search Mad Woman, 2 words. You can also find my podcast, Dire Straits, Straits with a GH, on Substack or anywhere that you get your podcasts. And you can get my book, Touched Out, wherever you get your books.
Yes, Amanda is so smart, if you can't tell from this conversation.
And you should
Oh,
definitely pre order Stephanie's book.
my book, The Ambition Penalty, yes. Speaking of corporate culture, the subtitle of my book is How Corporate Culture Tells Women to Step Up and Then Pushes Them Down. It really reckons with that myth that it's all so much better and exposes how bad it really still is. It's just better hidden. Uh,
Great.
yeah. Thanks everybody for joining. This was so much fun. I hope
Yeah.
everyone enjoys their Mad Men rewatches and let me know what came up for you in the comments. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.